Rush's passing brought back the passing of another great American that I loved and the left did not love. And this was back in the days when I was a liberal. I was certainly a Democrat. I don't know how left-wing I was, but I'm certainly a liberal, as I consider myself today a liberal. I'm a conservative because I'm a liberal, because conservatism is now where liberalism resides. But I want to talk about John Wayne. John Wayne, very similar reputation to Rush Limbaugh. John Wayne and Clint Eastwood are probably the two most enduring movie stars of all time. And that's very telling. It's very telling on what the audience is looking for when they go to the movies. They want to tell us that it's the latest left-winger. They want to tell us that the biggest star is the latest guy who makes the nastiest anti-Trump speech when we give him an award for being a genetic jackpot. But no, it's really John Wayne and Clint Eastwood are the two guys, both of them kind of representative of conservative values, the two guys who really endure. And, you know, when John Wayne died, I had a kind of a similar situation. I was a small town newspaperman when Wayne died. This is back in the 70s, the 1970s. And I didn't even think about it. I was a liberal. There were times when my newspaper scolded me for putting liberal bias in my newspaper, which is kind of the old days. And, but I thought, like, wow, this was one of the greatest movie stars of all time. He helped shape my youth. Watching him, I learned a lot about what it meant to be a man, what it meant to, saddle up even when you were afraid, as John Wayne would say. And so I wrote a column about him, and it was a comical column. It wasn't funny, but it was wry. I guess wry is the word that I would say. And I was a court reporter. I was a guy who covered crime. And I was covering a big murder case at the time, I think. And I walked into the courthouse the next morning, and from every corner of the lobby, prosecutors, politicians, assemblymen came and shook my hand and said, "Thank you for saying what you said about John Wayne. We were afraid to say it." And the idea that anybody would be afraid to say anything was completely foreign to me, because I wasn't really paying that much attention to the culture, but it was the beginning. It was the beginning of that cancel culture. And if you said good things about John Wayne, you were a bad person, because the 60s had happened and we were all supposed to be in line with the 60s. And he was supposed to be a bad guy. And the same thing, he was a racist. And there was a famous interview, I believe it was in Playboy magazine, where he said, he made untoward remarks. He made remarks that I don't agree with, but they were from his time. And remember, at that point, he was already 60, 70 years old. He was already getting up there, and he was kind of talking out of the past. And he said something like, the famous line was something like, I'll believe in white supremacy until blacks are ready to take over. They're not ready yet, but they will be, and they'll go forward. And he said he would cast black people, but he wouldn't go out of his way to cast black people. He said he would cast a character if that character should be black. That's what he said. And one of the things he talked about was Indians, because he was a cowboy actor. And so there was a famous take that Hollywood had been wicked to Indians, to Native Americans. And here's the quote. He said, "I don't feel we did wrong." I think this is from the Playboy interview. This is John Wayne. He said, "I don't think we feel we did wrong in taking this great country away from them, the Native Americans, if that's what you're asking. Our so-called stealing of this country from them was just a matter of survival. There were great numbers of people who needed new land, and the Indians were selfishly trying to keep it for themselves." Now, Charlton Heston, also another great Hollywood conservative, also used to talk about the fact that the Indians never invented the wheel. The Native Americans never invented the wheel. And how can you hold on to a continent if you don't invent the wheel? Haven't we progressed more because Europeans came over? Now, I see this as a little bit more nuanced. Obviously, there were atrocities in the Indian Wars by both sides. There were plenty of atrocities by both sides. But history is complex, and history, none of the people who complain about the Indians are giving their homes back. None of them are leaving to go back to Europe. So it's all kind of talk. It's all kind of virtue signaling. And the fact is, difficult things happen in the course of history, movements over time. It's strange to me that the same people who think our borders should be open so anybody can come in and move across our country feel it was somehow wrong for the Europeans to come to America and North America and move across that country and make it their own. There's anybody who was to say, oh, we don't want people, illegal aliens coming in and making this country their own, would be accused of being a bigot by the same people who say Europeans should not have come into North America and made it their own. And again, in terms of atrocities, there were atrocities on both sides of the fence during the Indian Wars. So the point about John Wayne, of course, is that he was an actor. He had a persona. And the question is not really what his personal ideas were. There's the same kind of thing with Rush. People might say anything at a given moment, or they might think anything at a given moment, but what ideas did he represent? Did his films represent? And he was in some great movies that had really complicated ideas about the Indians, the Native Americans. And I think that those ideas are really his legacy. And I wanted to take a look at some of them because they have really affected my way of looking at history, and I think they are so much more interesting and nuanced and complex than anything the left has to say about subjects like this. One movie is a film called Hondo, which was, if you've never seen Hondo, it's one of Wayne's best movies. It's 1953, and the amazing thing about it is it's 70 minutes long. I'm saying that off the top of my head. It may not be exactly right, but it's about 70 minutes long. It's based on a Louis L'Amour story. Louis L'Amour was one of the great and most prolific Western writers in America. He wrote so many Westerns, and many of them have been made into films and TV shows. But Hondo, I think, was his best. And Hondo was kind of a ripoff on Shane. Shane, the wanderer, comes in, the rider comes in to the people who are settled, and the drifter affects the lives of the family who is settled. And in this, Wayne plays Hondo, who comes, I think he's a Civil War veteran or something like this, and he comes on. What's interesting about this, by the way, is it was not directed by John Ford, but at the end, the director, John Farrow, had to leave, and John Ford directed the last parts of it. And Wayne finds a widow living with her son. The widow is played by a very young Geraldine Page. Some of you may know Geraldine Page is an much older actress, but she was the young ingenue in this. And she's got a son. And it turns out, and this is a bit of a spoiler, but it's worth talking about. It turns out that Wayne has killed her husband, who is a thief. Her husband is a bad guy, even a murderer, I believe. And Wayne has killed her husband. And at one point, Wayne wants to tell the boy, he becomes like a father to the boy, and the woman falls in love with him. The widow falls in love with him. And Wayne says, if I'm going to be part of this family, I've got to tell this boy the truth. And the mother stops him. And here's the scene. This is cut 11.
A man can afford to have noble sentiments and poses, but a woman only has the man she married. That's her truth. And if he's no good, that's still her truth. I married a man who was a liar, a thief, and a coward. He was a drunkard and unfaithful. He only married me to get this ranch, and then he deserted Johnny and me for good. And that's your fine truth for you. Could I bring Johnny up on that?
Oh, I guess you could.
And then you come along and you're good and fine and everything that Ed could never hope to be. And now with your vanity, you want to spoil Johnny's chances and mine.
That attitude, her attitude, that sometimes you have to lie to do the right thing, the noble lie, as Plato called it, is a civilizational adaptation. To some degree, you build your civilizations on lies. To some degree, the myths you have, the people, the George Washington cutting down the cherry tree or Honest Abe Lincoln, those things can always be debunked, but they are lies that tell a truth. And the lie that tells a truth here is that Wayne is the better man, and Wayne can give this boy a good life, and that's the truth that matters here. And why alienate him by telling him the ugly truth about his father? This is compared with the life of the Apaches who are surrounding this little farm, who only tell the truth, who have no version of lies in this film. And at the end of the movie, the Indians are being forced off their land. And Wayne looks and says, their way of life is over. Too bad, it was a good way. And that's a really profound idea about civilization and the primitive. You know, there's always a kind of longing for the primitive, especially among French romantic thinkers like Rousseau, who thought that there was a noble savage. I don't believe that was Rousseau's term, but the noble savage, the idea that man was born free, but now civilization has him in chains. And that too is a myth. That too is a lie. But there is something about the primitive life that is appealing. And when you see these movies, they're all the same movie, like Dances with Wolves and Pocahontas and what's the other? The one Avatar is another one. They're all the same story. Guy goes among the nature people and learns that his civilization is evil and nature is a good way to live. And that was really, in some ways, Hondo, except with a little more intelligence, showing that there was something really good about civilization, even with its lies, and it had to come. And this is the thing, the sort of energy of history, which is almost inevitable. All right, you know the drill. Your car is missing a piece, so you get in your car. It won't start because it's missing a piece. You pretend to drive to the imaginary auto parts store. You ask the imaginary guy behind the counter to look in his imaginary computer. And what do you know? He doesn't know any more about this stuff than you do. Why not just go on rockauto.com? First of all, you get to say rockauto.com, and that's always really, really invigorating. The ladies love it. You'll see. So you say rockauto.com, and you can get the car part you need right in your own computer. Rockauto.com is a family business. They've been serving auto parts customers online for 20 years. Go to rockauto.com to shop for auto and body parts from hundreds of manufacturers. And best of all, the prices at rockauto.com are always reliably low. The rockauto.com catalog is unique, it's remarkably easy to navigate, and you'll quickly see the parts available for your vehicle while you're saying rockauto.com. You can do both at once. You can shop and say rockauto.com at the same time. Go there right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Write Klavan, and you got to write it. You got to say it like Klavan in their how did you hear about us box, so they know we sent you. And I know what you're saying. You say, how do you spell Klavan? Because now you're just talking like that all the time. It's Klavan. There are no E's in Klavan. There is a series of novels, and if you haven't read these novels and you love novels, you should read these novels. They're called the Flashman novels. They're by George MacDonald Fraser, and they're about a coward flashman who was there's a famous school novel called Tom Brown's School Days, and he was the bad guy, the bully in Tom Brown's School Days, Flashman, and he gets expelled in Tom Brown's School Days. So George MacDonald Fraser used him, this guy from another novel, and made him the hero of his books. And what he is a coward. He's a terrible coward with no morals whatsoever, who somehow manages to get involved with every famous battle during the Victorian era and come out of it looking like a hero, even though he's not, even though he's a poltroon. And he uses Flashman to speak the difficult truths of history. And that's why it's such a good, I keep trying to get Ben to read these. I don't think he has, but he really should. He would love them. And I think you would love them as well. And Flashman at one point is in a club and he's drunk and he's just a horrible person, but he's hilarious. And he's in a London club and he's drunk and he starts listening to some pompous kind of left-wing guy go off on the treatment of the Indians. And he starts to shout in his drunken way. And this is what he says. He says, if you think the whites were a whit more guilty than your darling redskins, you're an even bigger bloody fool than you look. He says, what bleeding breast beaters like you can't comprehend is that when selfish, frightened men, in other words, any men, red or white, civilized or savage, when any men come face to face in the middle of a wilderness that both of them want, then war breaks out and the weaker goes under. He says, politics don't matter a damn. It's the men in fear and rage and uncertainty watching the woods and skyline. Do you see? You purblind bookworm, you. And Flashman is immediately thrown out of the club for saying what is obviously the truth, that history, the people acting in history are sometimes small, almost always small people acting against and for forces that were put in place without their approval and without their knowledge and without their understanding. They are just trying to build a home in the wilderness, and maybe the Indians are saying, well, this is my home, and they're coming, this is my land, and they're going to chase you off and kill you and steal your women, and the men are fighting back, and ultimately it's the weaker tribe goes under. And that's really what happens in history. And to pass this kind of lofty judgment on it that the left always wants to pass is like simplistic and stupid. And Wayne made films that, especially with John Ford, that represented that simplicity and that stupidity and tried to find a moral avenue through them. The greatest of them all is The Searchers, 1956. This is now looked upon as one of the great masterpieces. I find half of it to be one of the great masterpieces, and then there's a kind of comical love story in it that I just hate. I've never been able to convince myself that it's any good. But the story is really remarkable. John Wayne is a guy, this is in Texas during the Texas Indian Wars. A family is raided, a white family is raided by the Indians, and the women are carried off. And John Wayne goes off especially to get one of these women and to kill her because she's been raped. He knows, he assumes she's been raped by the Indians and turned into a squaw. And so he is going to kill her because he hates the Indians that much. He hates the Indians that much because of what he's seen. And at one point, one of the guys who's traveling with him to rescue a woman named Lucy, I think it's his girl, I don't think it's his daughter, I think it's his wife. He thinks he's seen Lucy, and Wayne tells him, no, I've seen Lucy. I know what really happened to Lucy. This is cut 7.
I saw Lucy, all right. She was wearing that blue dress and
What you saw wasn't Lucy.
Oh, but it was, I tell you.
What you saw was a buck wearing Lucy's dress. I found Lucy back in the canyon. Wrapped her in my coat. Buried her with my own hands. Thought it best to keep it from you.
Oh. Did they... What was she...
What do you want me to do? Draw you a picture? Spell it out? Don't ever ask me. As long as you live, don't ever ask me more.
And at the end of the film, he finds Natalie Wood in one of the most famous scenes of all movies. He chases her down to kill her and then picks her up and says, let's go home. And Wayne hates the Indians, and he hates the fact that she is now essentially an Indian. And the scene we've talked before about the Jesus' parable about the woman taken in adultery, and essentially it's that scene replayed in a Western film. And I think what the movie shows you is that that everybody is basically a savage. Everybody is basically a savage. They're all out to hate and kill and rape and destroy one another. But there is another way, and that this civilization that is coming has the opportunity to bring that way in. Obviously, it doesn't always survive. It doesn't always do it. But the replacement of primitive life with civilized life is usually a replacement for the better, and I would say especially with Christian life. You know, the left is making fun of Texas because they've had some blackouts because they've had a once-in-a-century storm. We have blackouts here in California all the time, and the weather is great. When there's a blackout, when there's any kind of emergency, you want to be prepared. That's why you want ReadyWise. ReadyWise is a leader in emergency food supplies. They have emergency meals, they have freeze-dried fruits and vegetables for convenient on-the-go nutrition, and they have new adventure meals for hiking, camping, and other outdoor activities. ReadyWise makes being prepared simple and affordable. Order online and have nutritious meals shipped directly to your doorstep. They're made in the USA, and they make being prepared just so easy. This week, my listeners can get 10% off at ReadyWise.com when entering Klavan at checkout or by calling 855-474-4084. ReadyWise has a 30-day, no questions asked return policy, so there's no risk in taking the initiative to get you and your family prepared today. That's ReadyWise, ReadyWise.com, promo code Klavan to get 10% off. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking anybody can spell ReadyWise. What do we look dumb? How? Please tell us how. Oh, how do you spell Klavan? It's Klavan. No E's. I just make it look this easy. And the final thing that really was in Wayne's movies was a genuine respect. I mean, this has nothing to do with John Wayne the man. It has to do with his persona. A genuine respect for the people that they met, because like the British fighting, the Imperial British fighting in Africa, they always attack Rudyard Kipling for his jingoism and for supporting the imperial endeavor. But like Kipling had a lot of respect for the people they were fighting. You know, here's to you, Fuzzy Wuzzy, in your home in the Sudan. You're a first-class fighting man, or Gunga Din, you're a better man than I am, Gunga Din. There was a sense of like, yes, these were people, these were noble people, these were even great people, but history had brought them into a clash, and the weaker was going to go under. You see this in Fort Apache, another great John Ford film. This is an earlier film, 1948. Where Henry Fonda plays a disappointed cavalry officer who has been sent out to what he thinks to Fort Apache, which he thinks is just a backwater. He's bitter and he's a martinet, and he talks about the fact that, other people are fighting the great nations, but we're just fighting these Apaches. And Wayne, who is a scout, puts him straight. This is cut 9.
We here have little chance for glory or advancement, while some of our brother officers are leading their well-publicized campaigns against the great Indian nations, the Sioux and the Cheyenne. We are asked to ward off the gnat stings and flea bites of a few cowardly Digger Indians.
Your pardon, Colonel. You'd hardly call Apaches Digger Indians, sir.
You'd scarcely compare them with the Sioux, Captain.
No, I don't. The Sioux once raided into Apache territory. Old-timers told me you could follow their line of retreat by the bones of their dead.
I suggest the Apache has deteriorated since then, judging by a few of the specimens I've seen on my way out here.
Well, if you saw them, sir, they weren't Apaches.
We'll discuss the Apache some other time, Captain.
And at the end, there's another brilliant scene, one of the most beautiful. It's just the visuals in these Westerns are unbelievably spectacular, just great, where Wayne goes out to talk to the Indians, and the Indians have scored a major kind of Custer-like victory, but they leave Wayne alone because they know he respects them and they respect him as well. And so, these things are so much more complicated. They're so much more complicated than the left wants to have us believe, and their dislike of, it's funny, my problem with the left is not about their lack of patriotism. It's not about their disdain for ordinary people. It's about the ideas that fuel those things, because their ideas are simplistic and stupid and wrong. And that is the problem. If you don't believe in the individual, if you don't believe in the freedom of the guy next to you, you really have nothing to say after that. Everything you have to say after that is going to take you down a bad road, a dark road, a hateful road. And we see this with their reaction to Rush Limbaugh's death. We see it with their dismissal of John Wayne, one of the truly great movie stars, and of the ideas that filtered through, which are not at all ideas of hatefulness against the Indians, but a sort of tragic sadness and appreciation of something that happened in history that was ugly on every side, that was really ugly all the way through in many ways, and somehow was just what history had in mind at that moment. It really is the simplicity of the left's ideas that leads them down that dark road into the hatred and misery that we can see basically in every word they speak.